Optional Unit 4 is on the topic of equality and diversity. So again, here we are continuing to talk about equality and diversity. If you have decided to take Unit 3, this is where we start talking about the concept of inclusion, and Unit 4 is dedicated entirely to equality and diversity. The purpose of this unit is to assess your ability and understanding of how to promote equality and value diversity. You will be encouraged to understand how to work with others, how to review and adapt on practice so that you can create an inclusive learning environment, and of course to promote equality. In order for us to create an inclusive environment where we promote equality and diversity, we should first explore what equality and diversity really are as key concepts here. So we're going to look at the definition of equality. So what is equality? Equality is about ensuring everybody has an equal opportunity and is not treated differently or discriminated against because of their characteristics. In a nutshell, this is what equality is. So we're going to learn much more about equality during the actual unit. And we're also going to be exploring the definition of diversity. Diversity is about taking account of the differences between people and groups of people and placing a positive value on those differences. So these are the two key definitions that we're going to be working with, exploring and thinking of how we can really create an environment that is inclusive and that promotes diversity. And we are also going to explore the benefits of promoting equality and diversity. So having learned the definitions and what these two concepts really are, then we're going to look at why we should ensure that we keep them in our minds, in our work, and when we select resources, when we deliver sessions, even when we evaluate our own practice and conduct action research. So let's take some time here to look at some of the key benefits. The very first benefit of promoting equality and diversity is that by doing so, we create a positive learning environment. Now, let's take a moment for you to think about an experience that you might have had where you didn't quite have a positive learning environment and how that prevented you from learning the material you were supposed to learn and etc. So I'm sure you have had those experiences, and that is why it is important that we as practitioners within the education and training sector are always striving to create positive learning environment, an environment where people feel included, where people feel that no matter what their skin color is, what their nationality is, what their social status is, they are all welcomed and treated equally, because this is what helps us create an environment that is positive and conducive to learning. Not to mention that there are key legislation requirements that we're going to look at a little bit later today as well in relation to these two concepts, okay? Another benefit of promoting equality and diversity is the increased involvement in the learning process, which very much follows from creating a positive learning environment. When people feel that they are supported, when they feel that the environment where the learning conducted is positive, they naturally feel like they want to engage more. They want to involve themselves in the learning process. So positive learning environment leads to increased involvement, and when we promote equality and diversity, we are better equipped to create it. Another benefit is the cultural diversity and the exchange of multiple perspectives. Now, As training practitioners or teachers, I would like you to think about the various cultures that could be present and represented within the learning environment. Think about your delegates or students. Think about them being from different countries, from different cultures, and now think about you involving them in the actual lesson or in the actual training session, asking them to contribute to the learning by sharing their own perspectives. Think about the diversity of perspectives and how this could contribute to your delegates or students learning something new, something that is interesting, and then feeling that they're part of a community, which is another benefit of promoting equality and diversity. When we encourage people to share their experiences, to share their perspective, especially when they're from different cultures, even from different backgrounds, or even if they're from the same culture but they have different previous experiences, when we ask them to share those, and when we have created a positive and safe learning environment, that helps them feel that they're part of a community. It creates a sense of community, which then results in improved individual and even team performance if you are delivering training to a particular team, for example. So these are some of the key benefits of promoting equality and diversity. Of course, there are many more benefits, but these are just a few so that you can think about why these two concepts are so important and why also there are key pieces of legislation that that governments have put together in order to ensure that organizations are compliant and equality and diversity are always taken into account. Let's have a look at some of these key pieces of legislation. Okay. One of them is the Equality Act 2010. The Equality Act 2010 legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society. It replaced previous anti-discrimination laws with a single act. What that means is that it combined the different pieces of legislation into one key piece of legislation, making the law easier to understand and strengthening protection in some situations. It sets out the different ways in which it's unlawful to treat someone. So this key piece of legislation is introduced in England. During this unit, we are going to look at each one of those protected characteristics that you should be thinking of and considering when you are preparing your lesson plans, when you are creating the learning content, and also when you're selecting the resources as well. So let's go through them one by one very briefly. We've got age, we've got disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. So in a nutshell, you are not allowed to discriminate against any of these characteristics, personal characteristics, because they are protected. So to give you an example of what could be considered discriminatory, that is if you're giving a negative example, for instance, you're talking about a certain situation or key piece of theory and you'd like to explain that theory by giving practical examples, and you have selected an example which puts a particular culture in a negative light, and you've got people from that particular culture or, for instance, race attending the class or the training, and then by sharing your example where a certain culture or, let's say, race is presented in negative light, that could create uncomfortable feeling within the delegate that belongs to that particular culture or race, and they may feel discriminated against. Whilst you may not even think about that as a training facilitator or as a teacher, These are things that you should always be considering when you are again preparing for the lecture, for the lesson, for the training session, because it is important that you are compliant with the legislation. Otherwise, people can even file a complaint, and the organization that you represent can get in trouble legally. So that is why during Unit 4, we are going to explore each one of those. We're going to think about practical examples so that we are compliant. Apart from the Equality Act 2010, we are of course going to look at other key pieces of legislation. Another example to give you here is one from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which actually promotes and upholds equality and human rights ideals and laws across not only England but also Scotland and Wales. So knowing exactly what they promote, knowing exactly what they stand for, will then help you to ensure that you and the organization or the school that you represent are compliant. And these are just two examples from Britain. Depending on where you're joining us from, you will be asked to think about the key pieces of legislation that are part of your own country and what are some of the laws that are applicable to you. We're also going to think about some of the laws that are applicable to your industry. Are there any laws that are applicable specifically to your industry in relation to equality and diversity? So these are concepts that we are going to explore during the sessions that are part of Unit 4. We're also going to talk about actions that can undermine equality and diversity. Some of these are bullying, harassment, peer pressure, cultural or religious tension, social inequality. Again, I would like to mention that this overview session that I'm delivering at the moment gives you just a very brief overview, and during the actual sessions that are part of this level, that are part of this unit, all these concepts and key pieces of learning will be discussed in much greater detail because they're very important practically when it comes to entering the real world and delivering training or delivering learning to students or delegates. And as practitioners, it is our responsibility to ensure that there is no bullying within the learning environment, there is no harassment. So it is important that we know and understand what harassment actually is. So you're going to look at the different definitions during the sessions. Again, we're also going to look at peer pressure and cultural and religious tension, social inequality, and how that all of these, when turned into behavior, can really prevent us from creating an environment where people feel comfortable, where people actually want to be part of the learning process. They feel included and they enjoy the learning process as well. As trainers, in order for our learning activities to meet the learning objectives and our delegates and students to ensure, for us to actually ensure that learning has taken place, the environment always needs to be positive. We're also going to talk about how we could actually promote equality and diversity practically, right? So apart from talking about all the key legislation, exploring the different negative behaviors that could occur and that we should ensure that we prevent from occurring, we're also going to think about what we can do as teachers, us trainers, to promote equality, to promote diversity, and to create an inclusive environment. For instance, these are just some of the ways that we could create an environment that is inclusive, where equality and diversity is promoted. So these are equality and diversity champions that could be assigned by yourself or by the organization. So these are individuals that you could ask to support you in promoting a culture of equality and diversity. You could also be hosting training sessions that talk about how important these concepts are. Exactly as I am talking to you about the importance of those two concepts, this is what you could be doing to ensure that equality and diversity become part of the learning culture, become part of the organization. And nowadays, a lot of employers have not only equality and diversity champions, even schools, but also they have sessions quarterly or yearly that are there to spread awareness of why it is so important to create a positive, inclusive learning environment where there is no discrimination, there is no harassment and negative behaviors. Another technique that you could use is corrective behavior. So here we're talking about delivering constructive feedback to students, to delegates who are not following the implemented equality and diversity protocol. So apart from the actual external regulations and the code of conduct, there could be, and there usually is, in my personal experience, every organization that I have worked with, they always have equality and diversity protocol. So now is the time to think about your own organization, if you're already a working professional, and whether you have read the equality and diversity policy, and if you have, what exactly does this policy include? So here, following listening to this overview session, watching this overview session, you can then look into your own equality and diversity policy that could be implemented already, just so that you could see the culture that your organization is creating. Okay. And